Tyra Banks is saying Netflix didn't just make a documentary. She says it cut hours of interview footage into a story that never happened. And that headline lands on the same day Washington is juggling an aging Senate power broker in the hospital, a shaky U.S Iran peace deal, more bloodshed in Gaza, and another reminder that when governments and media start editing reality, the public usually pays for it later. Today's news has one big pattern running through it. Control the narrative, control the reaction. That shows up in a defamation lawsuit against Netflix, in the silence around Mitch McConnell's condition, in the way Middle East war updates are being sold as peace, and in the growing fight over who gets to define protest, truth, and even evidence itself. We'll break down what Tyra Banks is alleging, why McConnell's hospital admission matters beyond one senator, and how the latest Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran headlines may be closer to a political spin cycle than a real turning point. If you're getting value from this, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Tyra Banks has filed a defamation suit against Netflix, the filmmakers behind its docuseries on America's Next Top Model, and Ever Wonder Studio. Her core argument is simple. She says she sat for a lengthy 3.5-hour interview, took responsibility for some of the show's controversial choices, and then watched that get chopped down to a tiny fraction of the original material. According to the lawsuit, those 16 minutes of edited footage were arranged to support a false and damaging storyline. The complaint says the series made it look like Banks knowingly ignored a contestant's sexual assault, and then used that trauma to boost ratings, even though she says she wasn't asked about that assault during the interview in the way the final cut suggests. That's a serious allegation because it goes to the heart of what a documentary is supposed to be. A documentary can have a point of view, it can be critical, it can be uncomfortable, but if the editing creates a fact pattern the speaker never actually presented, then you're not just telling a story anymore. And this is where the broader entertainment industry problem comes in. A streaming giant can package something as reality, truth, or inside access, but viewers often assume the label means the basics were handled honestly. If the lawsuit is accurate, Tyra Banks isn't just objecting to criticism, she's objecting to a version of events that, in her view, was assembled to make her look evasive and guilty. There's also a reputational fallout angle here. The complaint says public reaction got ugly fast, with backlash aimed squarely at her, including review bombing of her ice cream shop in Sydney. That's the modern punishment cycle. Clip, outrage, pile on, repeat. The original footage disappears, and the internet fills the gap with certainty. Long-running shows like America's Next Top Model also sit in a complicated place culturally. The series has been re-examined for body shaming, manipulation, and weirdly cruel photo shoots. Banks herself has already acknowledged some of those choices in past comments. That makes the lawsuit more interesting, not less, because it suggests she may have been willing to engage in a frank conversation about the show's legacy. Instead, she says the production team edited out the accountability and kept only the parts that fit the accusation. That should matter to anyone who cares about free expression and basic fairness. You can have a sharp critique of a public figure without turning a cut-and-paste edit into a fake confession. And once a platform as large as Netflix gets comfortable doing that, the line between journalism, documentary, and promotional theater gets very thin. And that brings us to Washington, where the people making national decisions are dealing with a very different kind of edit, the edit of silence. Mitch McConnell has been admitted to the hospital according to his spokesperson, but there's no immediate detail on why he's there or what his prognosis is. He's 84, he's one of the most consequential Republican figures of the modern era, and he's been under health scrutiny for years. This isn't gossip. It's a reminder of how much institutional power in Washington is held by people who are well past the age when most Americans would be expected to step back from physically demanding work. McConnell is still technically active, he still shows up, he still chairs hearings, but after years of falls, freezes, and visible health incidents, the broader question is unavoidable. How much of the system is being run by people whose condition the public only learns about in fragments? The Senate has no shortage of secrets, but a democracy doesn't get stronger when the people inside it become less transparent about their own capacity to govern. And speaking of systems that depend on selective truth, the Middle East is now being sold a peace narrative, while the strikes keep landing. Over the weekend, Israeli attacks across Gaza killed at least 6 Palestinians, including people hit near a hospital in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, as well as near Khan Yunis and in Gaza City. Gaza's health ministry says the death toll since the ceasefire deal signed in October 2025 has climbed to at least 986 killed and more than 3,100 wounded. That's the kind of number that gets softened in headlines with passive language. But the reality is not abstract. Families are still losing people. Rescue crews are still trying to reach rubble, and the ceasefire language is sounding more and more like a legal document trapped inside a war zone. The ceasefire itself is also being described very differently depending on who's talking. Hamas has been meeting with mediators in Cairo, insisting that Israel must first follow through on the initial phase of the agreement before moving to the next one. Israel, meanwhile, has been accused of expanding control over Gaza from 53% of the territory to 60% by shifting the so-called Yellow Line westward. At the center of the dispute is the familiar issue of disarmament. U.S. and Israeli officials keep framing Hamas as if it simply ignored an obligation to lay down weapons, but the reported agreement didn't actually commit Hamas to disarmament on day one. It called for demilitarization as a framework for later negotiations. That distinction matters because it's the difference between a signed term and a talking point. And on the Lebanese side, the situation is no cleaner. Trump said Sunday that Israel's strike on the southern suburbs of Beirut should not have happened, especially with what he called a near-complete peace deal with Iran. He said the Israeli attack on Dahiya was small and meaningless and argued it shouldn't disrupt the process. He also claimed he asked Netanyahu in blunt language what he was doing. That sounds dramatic, but the follow-through is where the story gets thin. U.S. and Israeli officials have indicated Israel notified Central Command before the strike, and there's little sign Trump is prepared to impose real consequences. No aid cutoff, no hard sanction, no visible shift in policy, just words. Lebanese officials said at least 3 people were killed in the Beirut strike. Israel says a Hezbollah commander was targeted, though that hasn't been independently confirmed. Netanyahu even posted video of the strike, which tells you how much of this conflict has turned into a spectacle for domestic audiences. And this is where the source landscape starts to matter. Some of the analysis around this war comes from outlets with very clear political leanings, and you can spot the difference between reporting and advocacy pretty quickly. Words like genocidal regime or apartheid state may reflect a real worldview, but they're not neutral descriptors. On the other hand, the mainstream US press often underplays civilian suffering to avoid sounding confrontational. So the smartest move is to separate the facts from the framing. The facts are already bad enough. There are reports of strikes across southern Lebanon, forced displacement orders in places like Tyre, civilian deaths in residential areas, and attacks that have killed rescue workers and damaged water systems. One recent account put the death toll in Lebanon since March 2nd at nearly 3,700. Whether you prefer one source's numbers or another's methodology, the direction is unmistakable. The supposed ceasefire has not stopped the killing. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran had been reached, and that a signing ceremony would happen Friday in Switzerland. Iranian officials later confirmed that a memorandum of understanding exists, and that further talks are supposed to follow. Trump, for his part, posted that the deal was complete, announced the lifting of the U.S. naval blockade, and said ships should let the oil flow. That's classic Trump energy. Declare victory first, sort the details later. It also fits the pattern we've already seen in this conflict. Over the past stretch, the U.S. and Iran traded strikes after a downed helicopter incident near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran hit back at U.S. bases in the region, and Trump bounced between threats and peace claims like he was trying to keep every audience satisfied at once. Today's announcement may be a real step toward de-escalation, but the track record says it's wise to wait for signatures, terms, and actual quiet on the ground. One detail worth watching is the Strait of Hormuz itself. Any deal that touches that corridor is not just diplomacy, it's energy policy, shipping security, and a direct issue for American consumers. If oil moves, prices move. If ships are threatened, supply chains wobble. For a lot of people back home, that matters more than the victory lap on social media. The big question is whether this is a real breakthrough or just another pause in a conflict with too many moving parts and too many people rewarded for pretending it's under control. And while wars are being narrated, other countries are now deciding which forms of speech, protest, and even imagery are allowed to exist. In the United Kingdom, the Court of Appeal backed the government's decision to ban Palestine Action as a terrorist organization. That means supporters of the group can continue to face arrest, and thousands already have. The legal fight is complicated, but the core issue is pretty simple. Should property damage and disruptive protest tactics be treated under normal criminal law or stretched into terrorism law? Critics say the government has gone too far and is using broad powers to crush dissent over Israel's war in Gaza. Supporters say the group crossed a line by targeting military-linked facilities and causing serious damage. This is one of those stories where the reporting can get a little too eager to wear its politics on its sleeve. The article language leans hard into activist framing, so it's worth stripping the rhetoric away and looking at the law itself. Even then, the concern remains. When governments get comfortable using terror statutes to police political protest, the definition of dissent starts shrinking fast. That same concern shows up in a different form in India, where AI is being used to manufacture sexualized propaganda against Muslim women. One example centers on a freelance model named Samreen Ayub, whose photos were turned into a fake video with a generated voiceover and a made-up narrative designed to humiliate her. The clip made her look like a character in a scandal, when in reality it was a fabricated attack built from ordinary campus photos and machine-generated audio. Researchers say this isn't rare. A study examined more than 1,000 publicly available AI-generated images and videos, and found that sexualized depictions of Muslim women drew massive engagement. A helpline in India has also documented hundreds of cases involving digitally manipulated content, and the trend is growing as the tools get easier to use. That's not just an overseas issue, it's a warning about what happens when cheap technology meets tribal outrage. It becomes incredibly easy to ruin somebody's life with content that looks official, sounds official, and spreads faster than any correction ever will. And that loops all the way back to Tyra Banks. A selectively edited interview, a fake AI narration, a banned protest label, a war described as peace, a hospital update with no details, and a Senate full of people guarding their health like a private asset. Different stories, same lesson. Modern power loves control over perception. Tyra Banks is accusing Netflix of turning hours of interview footage into a false and damaging narrative, which raises serious questions about documentary ethics and reputation harm. Mitch McConnell's hospital admission is another reminder that transparency matters when people in their 80s are still holding enormous government power. The Gaza and Lebanon updates show that ceasefire and peace deal are still being used very loosely while civilians keep dying. The U.S. Iran breakthrough may be real, but after months of whiplash, the only safe rule is to watch what happens next, not what gets posted first. And whether it's AI deepfakes, protest bans, or selective editing, the fight over reality itself is getting sharper everywhere. The most important stories today aren't just about celebrities or politicians. They're about who gets to shape the version of reality people are allowed to see. If this breakdown helped you make sense of the news, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with which story you think has the biggest long-term impact. The Tyra lawsuit, the McConnell update, or the fragile Iran deal. I read the comments, and I want to know where you think this is all headed.